What's up guys, it's Poir, and I'm going to go over my initial impressions of Lords of the Fallen, an upcoming Souls-like action RPG by CI Games. Thanks to Hexworks, the devs, for giving me an early access code. Now I've played about 6 to 8 hours and want to go over the game's systems and really dig into the technical stuff and how the game is shaping up so far. As you probably guessed by the title, let's just say there are a couple of worrying things that I just have to be honest about. Now the game is not done yet, we are getting patches still, so there is chances of issues being fixed or optimized or changed, but will it all happen before it hits public in less than a week? I don't know. Let's just say I get why they didn't do a public demo now. But it's not all doom and gloom, and there are some things to be hyped about, so let's cover how the game differs from Souls in pretty cool ways. While aesthetically the game does take from Dark Souls 3 mainly, in my opinion, the actual gameplay feels more like Dark Souls 1. It's back to that core RPG, going for that classic sword and board combat, and yet still feels vastly unique compared to any other Souls-like. You have all the basic stuff like block, parry, dodge, and charge attacks alongside your spells, but what's really cool about the weapon movesets is that you can interchange between one-handed or dual-wield and two-handing moveset mid-animation. You can do a charged R2 while in two-handed mode, hit triangle to swap mid-animation, and then immediately go into your normal one-handed moveset seamlessly with no delay, giving you a lot of mix-up potential, especially for PvP, which makes sense because this game did take on the help of G9 and Stilovsky, the Batman and Robin of Souls PvP, to help tune and balance the game. So for sweaty PvPers, this combat does give you a ton of freedom. Unfortunately, we cannot see that because they disallowed multiplayer. So how well PvP or co-op is actually designed is still up in the air. How stable are the servers? How smooth is the game when you have multiple people in your world, etc.? We don't know. Or at least, I don't know. But back to the combat, parry is more of a universal perfect guard or timely guard, like Liza P, where hitting block just as an enemy hits can deal stagger damage to them, and if you build up enough stagger damage through multiple parries or general attacks, you can get a visceral attack. The parry is not like Souls, it's more like Sekiro or Liza P, but parries and charge R2s deal significant posture damage, so it's not like you have to work too hard to get the actual critical. What's cool though is that you can do it without a shield, so even if you dual wield, you can still parry. So I can confidently say, unlike Liza P, parrying in this game is much easier because enemies have Souls-like attack patterns, which are pretty slow, pretty telegraphed with minimal frequency, and they don't have like super delayed and then suddenly supersonic speed like Liza P attacks. The drawback though is that even if you do land a parry, you still take wither damage. You also take wither damage on block, and your block reduction is super low compared to Souls games, but wither damage is basically recoverable health, shown in white here, that you can regain whenever you attack an enemy. But if you're hit without blocking or parrying, that recoverable health will be lost. So while it may seem like you get punished from blocking, you actually don't get too punished from blocking, since you can just recover that HP back by simply attacking, contrary to whatever Fextra said. Also, even at 1 HP, if you parry, you cannot die from wither damage. That is pretty neat and could make for some cool low-life runs from skilled players, or even some cool scenarios in PvP. My only gripe with parry is the sound and visual effects are pretty weak. So it's kinda hard to tell if you just normal blocked or parried, other than looking at the very small stagger meter enemies have. But moving on to dodge and run speeds, this is where the game, I would say, becomes more clunky. If I had to describe one word for the movement in this game, it's momentum. Every action has so much momentum that it feels a bit uncontrollable at times. Dodge is super long, generous in iframes, but super long. When you lock on, it does a normal dodge. This distance is great. This is fine. But as soon as you unlock and dodge, I'm propelled vastly more forward. Unnecessarily, I think, since this makes the traversing sections in the game a headache, since you can fall off a lot of times whenever you dodge about. There is a jump button, but it is pretty small, so jumping across gaps can be a headache sometimes too, leading to your death. And like the dodge, the running speed is a bit too fast, so much so that the animation just looks kinda odd. And because the item pickup and jumps are tied to the same button, you have to come to a complete stop to pick up an item, or else you just end up jumping over it, like jumping over a Goomba from Mario. Also, quickly, something I want them to absolutely change is picking up your death souls. For some reason, they thought it would be neat to make it an animation instead of just automatically picked up, but that just makes it annoying to pick up, especially in boss rooms. You have to manually run to that one spot to pick them up, go through the animation and risk being hit by the boss. So I do hope they change that. It's just a nuisance at this point where I can't tap X and just proceed with the battle safely. Moving on though, there are 3 forms of magic: Radiance, Inferno, and Umbral. Holy Element, Fire Element, and Dark Element. You do have to equip certain catalysts to use them. However, what's nice about this game is that your equipped spells can be assigned, so you can use up to 3 spells easily without having to toggle through them like you do in Souls games. Oh, they one-up you from software, ha! And I'm gonna say this off the bat, at least from what I've seen and what I've played, hybrid builds are gonna be the best builds in the game, at least early on. There's so many ranged enemies that I think having that ranged or AoE option is gonna be ideal. Melee does have access to a weird stance system where you can switch from your lamp to a throwable. However, it's meter based, so you can only throw so many at a time. Also, you only have so many heals, so having some radiance to use that healing spell is likely going to help you out a lot in surviving. And in case you're wondering, there is an upgrade system in the game for weapons to get like +5, +1 weapons and stuff like that. And there is respec as well. And lastly is the Umbral System. Basically, every level is actually like 2 levels, since you have the world of the living and the dead, which is Umbral. When you die, you will get a second chance at life by spawning in the Umbral world, but your HP is withered by 50%. But you can hit enemies and gain it back to full. Though if you do die in Umbral world, you're actually dead. So it's a bit of a Sekiro system here, but the Umbral system is actually really cool. There's a lot of cool spooky designs in it as well, which makes exploring intriguing since you have to look with your lamp throughout your progress of a level to see if there's like a potential shortcut you can find or even items you can find that you can't find in the living world. However, the longer you stay in Umbral, the more enemies will infinitely respawn. So you're kind of on a clock before you're just gonna get overwhelmed by monstrosities. The upside though is that you have a souls multiplier, so the longer you stay in, the more that multiplier builds up and you can get more souls that way. But obviously the more dangerous it becomes as well. There's also a lot of puzzles in the Umbral world that usually open up paths for you in the living world, and some are kind of mandatory, so if you don't like puzzles, this game has kind of a lot of them. But this whole feature of the Umbral world really makes this game different from other Souls games. It's kind of like Soul Reaver if you're a boomer enough to remember that game. As far as enemies, I would say nothing was unfair so far. Bosses weren't too challenging so far if you blocked or parried correctly. Some enemies or bosses had a second enemy in the Umbral world, which you had to kill in order to damage them, which is kind of neat, kind of fusing both worlds to make you utilize both worlds in a battle. All the players start with a soul lamp, which you can use to like view the Umbral realm. But what's interesting in combat is that you have the ability to pull a soul from an enemy, where you can then damage them, and it even works against bosses, giving you a moment to heal up or cast a spell or just do some damage on them with your melee weapon. Also, if you're holding up a lamp and near an Umbral enemy in the living world, if they hit you, they can actually drag you into the Umbral world, which is kind of cool. My gripe with enemies though is the amount of them. This game has too much enemies, too much ranged enemies. They're literally everywhere and can snipe you from across the map. In the Umbral world, enemies spawn infinitely. You're always having to deal with dreadlings with no moment's rest, which is too much since you still encounter normal living world enemies at the same time. So the game is hard only because of the amount of enemies you have to plow through, and if you fail, it's to the point of being annoying where you just kind of want to run past everything to get your souls and scramble for a shortcut somewhere. At least in this one mountain part of the game we could show. It's just really hard to enjoy this cool combat system of parries and getting your HP back in a stage where you're surrounded by 8 enemies always at once in your vicinity with a mix of range and melee. So I do hope they remove some enemies and reduce the spawn amount of enemies in the Umbral, or I fear replayability of the game will just be running past everything to get an item and then proceed. Because of Umbral essentially being a second layer to the level, it also slows your progress through a stage, since you got to deal with the living world and then deal with the Umbral in order to move on to the next area. So that one mountain stage with tons of verticality and shortcuts in both the living and Umbral world was pretty exhausting midway through it, and it felt like a lot of other streamers felt the same way when I was watching them. In terms of story though, I haven't paid too much attention to it, but it seems pretty decent so far. Kind of typical Souls-like, mysterious and dark kind of vibe. Now, it is a smaller studio, so I don't expect voice acting or animations to be top-notch, but the boss cutscenes were pretty well done, I would say, and the boss battles themselves are also pretty well done with their attack effects and such. One thing I didn't like with the whole story and lore, though, is that if you didn't meet the magic requirements of certain items or spells, you couldn't read the text of them. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but it also leaves like 2/3 of the players out of reading lore unless they invested into Radiance or Inferno. And lastly, of course, is the reason you click the video. I truly think the game should have been delayed, or at the very least, they should have had a demo or beta months prior, because I don't know how public perception with various hardware is going to react to this game on launch for PC. A lot of the bigger content creators that they have for this early access are using high-powered PCs with like 4090s and such, but in my pleb case, using a 3070 and i7, I wouldn't say it's unplayable, but it's pretty painful trying to play and record footage even at 60 FPS. The game has lots of stutters, FPS drops in certain places, and enemy AI and bug problems galore. More so, the enemy AI just kind of breaks often, or they will just get stuck on terrain and just run in place. But if you're not running powerful hardware, I would second guess getting the game at launch. Being honest, gotta look out for the buddies here. I struggle to find any big content creator with perfectly smooth recorded gameplay. Look around, I don't think there is any, except for a buddy of mine, Ruben, another content creator that showed off PS5 gameplay. And if you see that gameplay, I think that's literally the smoothest gameplay capture currently online right now. So at least in PS5's performance mode's case, it looks to run pretty solid. So for console users, there is hope for a nice experience day one. PC, we'll see, but if some of the issues I mentioned are fixed for both console and PC, then the game's gonna be a lot better. So far, it was pretty fun though. If you're a Souls fan and the game runs well, it's likely gonna be a good game to you. They got a good recipe here. There's just some ingredients that might ruin the meal for some players or kind of hold the game back from reaching a higher height. But it's definitely better than the first Lords of the Fallen, I can say that much at least. But those are my early impressions of the game. What do you guys think of the game so far after seeing various early access goers have a go at it? For my channel, there are going to be builds and there will be tips videos as well for Lords of the Fallen. So if you don't want to miss it, subscribe for more Lords of the Fallen epicness.